This is Robert Clotworthy, and you are listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Here are your hosts, James McQuiston, Oak Island theorist and author, along with John Hamels, PhD and historical researcher. Get the whole story right here, brought to you by Rabbit Hole Investigations.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Oak Island Plus. I'm Doc Hamels along with
Jim McQuiston, and we got a cute little show for you today, but I know we have all kinds of other things to tell you first, since last we met.
Yeah, Jim. As always, I'm so humbled, and I think we both are, the fact that almost 92,000 views of our channel, our YouTube channel, since we started almost 2 years ago, and closing in on 2,200 subscribers. And you know, when you work in isolation like we do to a degree, it's heartening to know that people are interested in what we're doing.
Yeah.
You know,
And you know, we get a lot of comments, and we try to answer them as we can, but we have to admit that this last time through, we didn't get to answer any of them because we've been busier than heck.
yeah, we have.
Doc's going to tell you about a little film we did, but first I'm going to tell you that I was on the spin-off show of Curse of Oak Island called Tales from Oak Island, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So that took up quite a bit of time, and I also came out with a new book.
Of course you did. You told me 2 books ago that you were done writing books.
Yeah. What this is it looks at principally 4 of the so-called legends or stories of Oak Island, and it pares it down a lot of the research that both Doc and I did of a pragmatic look at them. Now, we're not trying to take the mystery out of it because there's still so much mystery we'll never get through it, but it's one to have on your bookshelf, I think. And Doc has we participated in a couple of podcasts that I think Doc could tell you.
If you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see a half-hour show with Chris Carrozza. Chris is a master mason, and he's also a historian and a producer and an author and all kinds of different accolades that he has accomplished over the years, Jim. And Chris invited us to come back and actually produce 2 different videos. One as far as where we are right now with our research, and will be coming out hopefully on our channel soon. And then Jim, he interviewed you for a separate topic, right?
Yes, we talked about my Templar to Freemason connection, and it's both of these are up on the New York State Grand Lodge website, both of our interviews, which means that all the Freemasons in New York State can access it. And Doc doesn't make a big deal about it, but he's a Freemason. He was a Freemason when I met him. And I, through this whole thing that Chris did for us, I ended up becoming a member of the Scottish Rite Research Society from out of Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So in my case, because I'm not a Mason, I'm not going to be told any big secrets, but I'm not going to also tell them. Doc never can tell me a secret. He'll tell me something, he'll say, go look here, it's on public domain.
It's on Facebook or Wikipedia, but that's it.
That's as close as we get on there. So with all that going on, it just took so much time, so much of our time.
Well, and you've been interviewed in the newspaper, it's been really a busy month. Yeah, for sure.
And throw in the weather and crazy. So actually, for those folks out there that are burdened by weather and everything else, we'd like to be your home. You know, we're all family here, and we just talk in a homespun way, try to give you our best take on things. So,
well, let me frame this real quick. What we're going to talk about next, right? This.
Yes.
I can't remember what day it was. It was early summer or spring, and Jim calls me up, and he's like, really mysterious. He goes, I get this phone call, but I can't tell you anything about it. I go, Jim, we've been working together for how many years? No, I'm on an NDA, and you can talk about what the NDA means and all that stuff. And the next thing I know, you're gone. I'll take it from there.
Yeah.
Poof.
Well, whenever you work with Prometheus, that produces Curse of Oak Island, you sign a a non-disclosure agreement, which is an NDA, and there's a substantial fine if you violate it. But you don't want to violate it because you want to cooperate with them, and so they had me come up to Nova Scotia to talk about the basic theory of the Knights Baronet, and which we're going to get into through the show. But we're always updating we're not stuck in the mud with our theories. If we find something new and it's provable, put it in there. And,
right, it's growing.
Just as a couple examples was we found out, we talked a lot about the first Masonic Lodge, Mary's Chapel, and that Mary Queen of Scots had allowed the Freemasons to have secret meetings again. Well, found out that the place where that document was found is less than 5-minute walk from where the first Masonic Lodge was. They were right in the they were neighbors right in the neighborhood. And that adds quite a bit of oomph to the theory. And then another thing is that when we were doing the HO stone, you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And it had GS on the stone, and all we could find was General Survey or General Surveyor. That's what we thought it was at the time. It actually means Geodetic Survey, which means it's part of a bigger survey, and that's exactly what we said in the show, that it was part of this great map of Nova Scotia. I think it was 1835, and Oak Island was in the H section, and that explained the H on the stone. The circle, the dot
right here
was a surveyor's post, and the cross
and the dots
was where you started your transit when you started surveying, and that was our proof that is a surveyor marker from, I believe, 1817.
So
Ross.
Anyway,
Ross, William Ross. So things like that happen, and something that happened that you'll see in the show, I don't know if it was just me, but in watching the Curse of Oak Island and reading and whatever, I kind of had the idea that Nova Scotia wasn't particularly sophisticated when the money pit was found, and that could be the case in some areas, but this university where they filmed me at, it was built before the money pit, and it was just gorgeous. It was a gorgeous university with columns.
And the name of the university
is?
Tower
King's University.
Okay.
And it was said that was up at Windsor originally, where a lot of rich people lived. A lot of rich people weren't living on Oak Island. Mm-hmm. They were living up at Windsor. So, your perspective grows on these things, and we don't mind blending it all in. So, on this first slide that you'll see here, I just called it a trek to Nova Scotia, which it was a trek. It always is, because you got to get to the airports. And when I went up there during COVID, it was real crazy.
Jim, now you've been on 3 different versions of Oak Island, right?
Yep. I've been on the Maddie Blake show. I've been on the Tales from Oak Island, and I've been
Curse of Oak Island.
On the Curse.
So is that like 16, 17, 18 times now?
Well, I think it counts out to 14, but I wasn't sure about all the stats myself, and I blew myself away by this next slide that you'll see right here. I thought, well, I'm just going to itemize my association with them, and I'm going to try to zoom down through this, but it amazed me. But I first hooked up with them in fall of 2016, and I started answering a ton of questions through email. Then they had me come up in the spring of 2017, and the first thing they had me do was go with Doug Kroll over to COGS, which is the Center of Geographic Sciences. They had a wonderful library of maps and books from Scotland and Nova Scotia. And then the next day I went over to Oak Island and I gave my presentation. I was the last guy to present in the old war room that day.
When you said they had you come up, who were we talking about, Prometheus?
Prometheus and Rick Lagina, and I have to tell you that I don't answer phone numbers that I don't recognize because, there's just so many scams out there. And I saw the phone ring. I saw the number. And I didn't recognize it, but it said Michigan. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there in my lazy boy, where I said a lot, and I'm like, should I answer that or not? And I answered it, and he said, Mr. McQuiston, this is Rick Lagina. Do you have a minute? I was already sitting down, and I wanted to sit down somewhere else.
I got an hour or two for you.
Yeah, and that's when he first talked to me about coming up. Would I be willing to? And do cats wear climbing gear? Is the Pope Catholic? So that's how I first went up there, and I spoke in the war room about the Knights Baronet and William Alexander at the very first time that I was there. I also talked about Glooskap and Zichmini from the Henry Sinclair saga, and we're going to do a show on that in the future. But I didn't get on the show from that filming, but they recommended that I write a book because we'd been trading so many emails and so much information, and they literally said, it's all going to get lost in our emails if we don't do something about it. I said, all right, well, I'll try it. So I did, and that was Oak Island Missing Links. So then they had me come up the next year, and that's when I proposed the 1632 date for the mystery to begin, based on science and history. And they did put that one on. That was the first time I was on. That was when I had the red
checkered
plaid shirt, whatever you call it.
Yep.
And
so do they fly you up there, drive you up there? How do you get there?
a fly. Most of the time it's out of Buffalo, but one time they flew me out of Toronto, which it's a 4-hour drive from Toronto. So but the flight's real short from Toronto, so there is a plus there. Buffalo, you got to make connections everywhere, but you fly into the Halifax airport, which isn't. It's not a small airport, but it's not a big one like Charlotte or something. Yeah. So it's easy to get out, get to your rental, and then you typically drive down to the island, although that didn't happen this particular time. But so that was book Oak Island 1632, because I wanted to plant that date as a possible date, and we've discussed that before. But then they brought me up the next year, and by then I knew about the Scottish treasure that our buddy Al Strachan stole. And so I talked about that, and I talked about how he was connected to William Alexander and other people, and he was a Knight Baronet, and he was one of the first Freemasons. Right. And I'm like, you guys got to pay attention to this, because I don't know all the facts yet, but I do know some, and it's exciting.
And Jim, think about from that point forward how much that they have talked now about Freemasons connected to the Oak Island story, and I think you've been right up front of that whole wave of discussion, and maybe you've even sparked some discussions on that.
I believe so, because before I started talking to him, I never heard the name William Alexander before, and now they've mentioned it several times. He was the guy that founded Nova Scotia and named Nova Scotia, so you can't ignore him. So, and the Knights Baronet, that all of that. So that got it on the radar. But still, you're competing with Vikings and Templars and whatever
Phoenicians and Portuguese
pirates and Portuguese pirates, and so you got to kind of work your way in. But so I wrote that book, Oak Island 1632, and then I presented again about the Scottish treasure, but there was a medallion found up to New Ross, and it was from 1671, and Doug and I did a bunch of research on it and figured out what it was, and we talked the gentleman who found it into bringing it down to the war room. Well, that didn't get filmed because it was a Saturday morning. There was no forewarning. The guy just called and said, okay, I'll come in. So I have photos of it, but you'll never see that on TV, unfortunately. So, and then Doug and I went up to the Nova Scotia archives after that, and I found some old clippings, newspaper clippings about Oak Island and the meetings, how the Masons and the Oak Island Association met at Dalhousie University. And that whole story about Lord Dalhousie, and
so they really brought you into the inner sanctum of the whole research of this thing, right?
Yes. And I have to tell you about, we were going to meet with the archivist of Dalhousie. We had it planned for like 3 months. We'd been exchanging emails. We get into my presentation, and Doug says, well, I have bad news for you. They canceled. I said, what do you mean they canceled? He said, they canceled. I said, they postponed? He said, no, they outright canceled, and they won't tell me why. we think that we tripped the trigger there because I had presented them with 8 connections of Oak Island to Dalhousie, and Doug had heard that in the basement there is a whole raft of Oak Island artifacts that they're not being shown by anybody, and he was trying to figure out a way to get in to see them. So there is absolutely a connection, and now we found out that Dalhousie was the guy who commissioned the big survey.
The governor of Nova Scotia.
He was the main guy behind it all. So it's all interconnected, and Doc said this so many times that this is a much bigger story than Oak Island. Oak Island was part of it, but you couldn't have had Oak Island without all the other people and all the other locations, New Ross.
Multi-generational story.
Right.
We coined that phrase long before the Laginas did.
Yeah. And of course, Art, our friend Art Guinness, he helped us with, he started out with a M rock, he called it a W wall. And we realized, well, a W was an M turned upside down, and that we found out that was the port of the Maltese, and then we found out that the Knights of Malta were there contesting the Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia, and nobody knew this. We got a
Nobody talks
battle.
about it.
You got a knightly battle in the middle of barren Nova Scotia that never made the history books, and even Laird told us.
I know, they
They
didn't teach it in school.
And yet it's a major part of their history.
Yeah.
So that's how, what we mean is that everything's so interconnected. Even our shows are all interconnected. But and then in 2020, it was the year of COVID, and so they set up a Zoom meeting, and Rick and Marty. That's the first time I actually met with Marty in a meeting. He didn't come to the other ones, and Craig and a few other people were there, and that was a big hullabaloo about getting the camera set up, and they sent me a GoPro to clip on, whatever. But we finally got it going, and that was quite the meeting. And they focused a lot on the Freemasons in that. And I believe Maddie Blake might have been involved too. But it was very much about Freemasonry in Oak Island. And the Mayflower, because I found that a lot of people that had been involved in the Plymouth Company ended up being involved in Oak Island. So I wrote 3 books that year, because what else could I do? You couldn't go anywhere. It was COVID year. So I wrote the Oak Island and the Mayflower. I wrote Oak Island the novel, which was just like a throwaway idea.
I really enjoyed that one,
and it was going to be a big movie someday.
Yeah.
And then I wrote Oak Island Endgame, which was narrowing down this theory of the multi-generation, but I didn't have it. You don't get things verbalized for a while. You have them floating around in your head, but So then in 2021, they brought me back up again, and it was still very strict COVID conditions, so I couldn't leave the hotel. I could only go from the hotel to the island and back. But Carmen came over, and we traded books. He has that book on the oxen.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what book I traded him, but we had a nice talk there. He wasn't too afraid of it, and I wasn't either. And but it was funny, I had to get tested 3 times. To even get on the island, first to get into Canada and then get on the island. And everybody was really down and out. And I thought, wow, it must be the COVID thing is really bothering them. No, that was when they got shut down because of the Mi'kmaq.
Yes, the artifacts, the pottery.
Artifacts.
Yeah.
And they had just got shut down within days of me getting there. The whole dig was still there. Charles took me up and showed it to me, but he said, don't put this on TV. Whatever you do, don't. I'm sure Rick told you, don't put this on TV. All right, I won't. But so I think that's what, and Rick, or not, Marty and Craig had gone back to Michigan. They were so upset about it. They're like, we can't even dig on our own yard, in our own yard, and Rick was kind of left to hold the bag there for a while until they could get their bearings. But it was interesting because it was not the norm, and I kind of like it when it's not the norm. So I gave 2 presentations that year. One was on the Mary Queen of Scots cipher code, which we did a show on that, right?
Yeah.
And then the other was about the bag seal. And so then I wrote a book, Oak Island and New Ross, and I had Carmen helped me a lot. He used to be the historian of the town of New Ross, and he helped me a lot on that. And Doc did. That's the first book Doc got involved in.
It was down the hole after that.
Yeah, that was that because of that old painting. That's 1634, 33 painting.
Edward Norgate.
So then in 22, I didn't get called up there, and I wrote Oak Island Curses, Codes, and Secret Societies, which was based on Mary Queen of Scots Code, and I wrote Oak Island Knights Templar and Freemasonry. And this was when Doc and I first got involved in really talking out that connection and saying, wow, look at this, look at that. And
the names were just too coincidental to see the Templar names and then the Masonic names and then seeing the Knights Baronet names, and then we put it all together.
And so Doc made arrangements for us to use the back room, the ballroom of
Meter's Restaurant.
Meter's
Right
Restaurant.
in Ripley, New York, my hometown.
They had like 30 feet of room divider that you could stick little 3M Post-it notes on it, and we had that thing just about full, and we had categories down the side and family names across the top. By the second day, Doc said, I've got to database this in Excel because it
was huge, and that kept growing and growing and growing.
And so from that, I wrote Oak Island, a Masonic Conspiracy, and we decided that we were going to start this show, Oak Island Plus, because there was just too much information that needed to get out there. We felt it needed to get out there, and we felt people would like to watch it, and obviously by our stats.
Right, and all this time we've stayed in what we say our own lane. We didn't go off into different tangents any more than we had to. So basically we've done stonemasons to Freemasons to Knights Baronet and the Knights of Malta. That's basically the four groups that I think we've covered in a kind of a compressed time frame.
And we had Laird Niven, the archaeologist. We had Carmen Legg, the blacksmith.
Tony Sampson,
the diver. Yep. And then those are all from the island, basically. And then we had Scott Walter, and we had Art Guinness was our first guest. And he's the one that got us going on the Knights of Malta.
Dave Neeson. Neeson. And then we had Erskine.
John Erskine. This John Erskine story, because he's the one that wrote the charter for Nova Scotia. So it just kept intertwining, and the Oak Island, a Masonic Conspiracy book was, based around Oak Island, but I wanted to write one that skipped over Oak Island, that was just for Freemasons, so they could see our theory without being colored by is it connected to Oak Island or not. So I wrote a book called Perpetual Prohibition, which was strictly historical Knights Templar to Freemasonry, and I ended up doing a talk to 55 Masonic historians from 5 different states based on that information, and again we started this show right after that. So they called me to go up to Nova Scotia for this Tales from Nova Scotia or from Oak Island.
And we didn't even know the name of the show at the time, right? We didn't even know they're going to do with it.
Nope. And all they told me was it was a short series, and that I was not to talk about it, and I was not, oddly enough, not to mention the Curse of Oak Island. They wanted it to be a standalone show, even though they had Doug on it and they had Charles on it. They had a lot of
other
same
folks
people.
Too.
And we filmed at a university, which we're going to show you here in a minute. But
let me ask you a question, though. Why did they call you?
Well, I think because they are trying to help prove the multi-generational conspiracy, and they already had the Templars and they already had the Freemasons, but they didn't have what connected them. And now they realized, oh my gosh, it is the Knights Baronet that connects them, and this tells our story better. It tells the same families, the same flow of trying to get to America, potentially bearing something there, whether you had to or whether you wanted to. And I believe that's why, I didn't know, but it was funny because they sent me a list of 50 questions. And my first comment back to them was, wow, I haven't played 50 questions since I was 12 years old. But so I answered them all, and they wanted, short, not sound bites, but short explanations, because it could get ridiculous, of course. And they didn't ask all of them, but they did ask a lot of them, and it was a guide. It was a guide to get through the show smoothly, so it seemed like it flowed.
Yeah. So let me ask you another question. So you were really part of a very elite group of people that they interviewed for this show. How's that make you feel?
Great. I mean, well,
you're sitting here just as cool as a cucumber. I'm going like, you just were on international TV, man.
Well, and it isn't, for me, it isn't so much about being on TV, and it hasn't been even from the beginning. It's about this history getting out there. This has been my driving force right along, not to sell books, not to sell our channel, anything, but look, this is real history. It wasn't taught in school. You don't see it on TV anywhere, but it's real. It's very real. It's more real than a lot of
You feel a certain responsibility, don't you?
Yeah, actually. So overall, I've been on the Curse of Oak Island, or a spin-off show, for 14 times. I was in the war room for 6 meetings. I was in a war Zoom. I call it a war Zoom meeting. And I've written 13 books, 12 including Oak Island, and then 1 without it. And I was in the top 10 theory 3 different years. And that one year I was in 2nd place, which was pretty cool, because I thought they weren't. Yeah. I was watching the countdown, and I'm like, I'm not even going to be in the list. That ended up being the 2nd.
Very cool.
And we've produced, this is our 22nd show here. Yeah. So we should probably get into the guts of the show here. And so they had me go to King's University, which is now in Halifax. It's near Dalhousie. It's actually kind of on Dalhousie ground in a way. I don't want to misrepresent it, but that wasn't the original King's University. And on this slide, you'll see the original. And this was founded in 1789, which was 6 full years before the Money Pit was even discovered.
Wow.
So when you hear about the Money Pit and you're seeing these young kids going out fishing or whatever, and then they're exploring and they're digging with shovels 30 foot and all that, people were building edifices like what we're looking at right here. And pretty grand. And it's the oldest chartered university in Canada. And hockey was invented there, which is just cool. They must have been so bored in the winter or something. They had to come up with something.
I did not know that.
They invented hockey there, the boys in the classes. Mm-hmm. So it burnt in 1920. So they, in order to get the funds to rebuild them, they were asked to move it down to Halifax. And so they rebuilt it again. And you can see in this slide, you can see the same basic design, the big columns up front and the big bell tower, just exactly like it was.
Now, who commissioned this university to start with again?
I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't think it was Dalhousie, because he wasn't there
yet.
So somebody else did. But it's a major institution and it's majorly historic. I think it was why they chose that. They chose it because it was historic. And it has a big courtyard in the middle, and right opposite the building I just showed you is this library building. And it's really fancy inside. And one thing in there that they have, it's like a Rosetta Stone. It's not the Rosetta Stone, but it's a legitimate stone that has a couple different languages on it. They have it in a case and everything. They had to take us all down there to see it because they're so proud of it. But we went right up those steps into that door, and it was funny, you couldn't take water in there, so they had water coolers, coolers out there with water and snacks and everything outside. You couldn't smoke, which I don't anyway, but you couldn't drink water.
So this is where they actually filmed you?
Yep.
Right in the library.
So when you walk in, you see this beautiful staircase thing. And right behind it, where the red arrows, you can see that there was a metal detector. So everybody had to walk through that detector individually, and then you turned right to the left into that door, right past that painting there, and you can see through the pillars. That's actually the room that we met in. There were 5 people like our buddy Randy here that they had one on the camera, they had one on the sound. They had the producer that was asking me the questions. They had a couple other guys who were just troubleshooters. And then they had a lady that had set this whole thing up with the university. She was like a liaison with the university.
So they sort of took over this whole floor with cameras and stuff?
Yes. And but it's very quiet in there. You had to stay quiet until you were talking on the show, and you had to be very careful because everything is like antique tables and whatever in there. So inside that room, this next slide is inside it. Kind of oddly, but they had me sitting right in that doorway between those two bookcases, and so they were filming those windows behind me, and then the producer was sitting on this side of them. The sound man was off to the left there behind that bookcase, and the other two gentlemen were off to that side behind that bookcase, and the camera came in on an angle. So what basically we sat there, he could pick and choose which 50 questions, but the goal of the questions was to carry the story on, right. Give us a guide. So he would, they never told me what to say, and they've never have, and since 2016, they never told me what to say. They did tell me how to sit and to put my hands on the table and all that kind of stuff, because they can't have a bunch of moving around and everything. They're trying to, do a film. So anyway, he went down through the questions, and I answered them the best I could, and then they edited it all out. So they've literally filmed me 24 hours or something now, and they've used about an hour or hour and a half total.
So I've seen all the tales from Oak Island, and the scenes are a little different sometimes when they're interviewing people. Did they move the camera shots a little differently?
Well, apparently they did. I did not see anybody else being filmed, but they told me that Laird Niven was coming in right after me, and then Emma was supposed to be there, but I don't remember seeing Emma on the show.
No, maybe they're still going to show it sometime.
But yeah, and they had those other gentlemen, the one with the British accent that gets on a lot of Prometheus shows. And I believe they filmed them up against the bookcases.
Right, and Doug Kroll was there.
Oh, yeah. And Charles was there, yeah. So they probably wanted to just, add some life to it by moving the background setting around. But I believe it was all filmed there.
So basically, you were included in a lot of the principal characters that are now on The Curse of Oak Island.
Yeah.
That's pretty nice.
And I didn't know who would be on it. I didn't know if maybe they'd be going to other theorists like Scott or, there's many other ones out there. But they didn't. They stuck with Templar, Knights Baronet, Freemason was the theme of it for the multi-generational conspiracy of elites that we talk about. So then I left there, and I wanted to go. They weren't working on the island right then, and they were delayed this past season for some reason. We'd never have figured that out. But I texted with Doug and with Gary, and they both had reasons that they couldn't make it to the lounge to meet with me, whatever. And interestingly enough, Gary told me that his family was on the way up there in a camper trailer, his wife and 2 kids. Well, guess what?
His daughter's
on the show now. So that's how that came about. They had never been to the island in all the years he'd been working there. They'd never been there. They wanted to see what Pops was
You know what? I haven't been there either.
Yeah, well, you're
Uncle Jim.
Get in the camper.
Randy, you haven't been there yet, have you? We could do a show there.
Oh, wow. Great. So, what I really wanted to do was get on Tony Sampson's ride, because I'd seen the island from the island and from the causeway, but you get a totally different perspective when you ride around the outside. And I'd never seen Fred Nolan's property, because you can't see that on the show. And so I thought, oh man, I got to hook up with Tony. So I had called him ahead of time, and we got it all lined up for when I would meet him at the boat.
And after we interviewed him, I learned a lot from that experience you had with him.
Oh, yeah.
Different perspective, totally.
Yeah, and he tells quite the story on his boat. I mean, if you ever go up there, you want to include that in there, because, he's a salty sea captain, just like Robert McKinnon was.
He is.
I mean, they tell it like it is. They have their ideas of what's going on. So this was just one of the photos I took from Tony's boat, and this shows Fred Nolan's property, which you don't see on the show. It's quite a nice place there,
it is.
And they've got a lot of frontage. And over at the red arrow on the right there, you'll see that's the backside of the swamp. So where they're always talking about the eye of the swamp is located between that area and the main swamp. And that's why they're into that area now, because they never could get into that area before. But Tom Nolan's being
Right.
so cooperative with them to, like, I want to know what my dad was doing, you know.
Yeah.
So that's how that, if they were two islands, that would be where they, at one time, that would be where they connected right there. So, and we went all around the island. They're ringing it with large, big rocks, like not the size of a Volkswagen, but close. And Tony was explaining that climate change has made over 100 islands disappear. They used to always say there was like 360 islands in Mahone Bay. There's like 100 and some now. And he said because it's interesting, but the trees on the windward side always grew short with deep roots to hold them in. But the trees on the leeward side, where there wasn't wind, grew nice and tall, but didn't have much of a root base. Well, when that wind started changing around about a dozen years ago, it started taking out the soil,
Yeah.
the
Erosion.
big trees collapsing, the beach going away. And so he said, he showed me this one shoal. It was at low tide, and he said, that used to be a farm. My mom used to go there and get milk from the
kidding.
people.
Wow.
They had cattle on that right there. Now it's a shoal. But he said the one advantage for him was that he couldn't go on those islands before because they were privately owned to explore. But now he can swim over the top of them and look for things in the water.
That's pretty weird, isn't it?
Yeah, so there was one blessing to it, but he said it's a shame. That's why they're ringing those Oak Island and a lot of other islands up there with those giant rocks. Now Nova Scotia is like 90% rock. I mean, it's just rock everywhere. And whatever they say on the show, we found a stone in that location. I think it would have been more weird if you didn't find a stone in that location. But so he said they're going to have to nurse it every year though, because the tides will undercut, and then they'll have to move raise the rocks back up into. And actually, Charles took me down to Isaac's Point, which I'd never been there before, to show me how they lined rocks. It used to be lined with the big trees, the big oak trees. Now it's lined with big rocks on that point to hold the water back. So we have 4 real short film clips. This is like, I feel like it's summer vacation, whatever. But
Jim's big experience.
yeah, Jim's big. But anyway, there's just 4 of them, and they're all very, very short. But when I went I wanted to get onto the island, but I just left the filming, and I had to drive an hour down to Oak Island, and I was hungry. I hadn't eaten all morning or anything. It was like 3 in the
They
afternoon.
didn't feed you?
And I'm thinking, I got to get something to eat before I go on Tony's boat ride. And I was going down to this little town called Mahone Bay, right below Oak Island, which is a great, beautiful town. It's just unbelievable, picturesque. And I stopped at a place to eat. Well, I passed Rick's new store. So this first film clip, it's short, but this shows the front of the store. It's still being worked on. And you can see all those flowers, and I'll guarantee you Rick planted them, because when I went out to his house in 2021, he was showing me all the flower gardens that he put in. And I'm like, where do you have spare time to put? You're making things out of wood in your wood shop. You're making jewelry out of stones from Oak Island. You're on the island all the time. And you're planting flowers too. He keeps busy. So then I went inside, and they were playing some heavy metal music, and there were 2 guys. You'll see this counter in there. We'll play it. And they were behind that counter. They were doing some electrical work, and the music was blaring. So I just took a shot of it before it was stocked. But now it's all full-blown
Right. Lots of different things you can purchase.
store. And that's where you can, that's kind of in lieu of the old interpretive center, because they used to sell shirts and things like that there, but they're so focused on the lab and the history. And
Try to separate the whole thing. Yeah.
Laird told us they're going to try to bring all the artifacts back that they know that are out there on loan or whatever, to get them all on that building. So I think that was the purpose of the store, was to get the marketing off the island and get just the lab and the museum quality items there. So then Gary had told me that you won't find anybody on the island tomorrow morning. It's a Saturday. And so I thought, well, if there's nobody there, there's nobody's going to get off the island. So I went over there. So I have this little film clip. I never did engage with anybody, although I think Rick was there because I saw I believe that's his truck. But anyway, but I got my first view of the big building. So here that is right here. Here's the new big structure. And there's the old interpretive center. And there's a look back down the causeway. There's 3 cars here. Nobody's come out yet. I might just hang out till somebody does and see if they tell me Rick's around. I think that looks like his truck right there, but I can't tell. So the dark blue part is the new building, and that's where that lab is, where Emma works.
Right.
And then the other part is the old interpretive center, but I'm sure it's all part and parcel at this point.
Right.
And then on the way back home, because then I had to leave because I had to take the flight out that next day, and but the road kind of winds, and one goes off to the airport, which is like about an hour away, but the other one veers off to New Ross, and it's only like 8 miles up from that corner to the New Ross site. So I thought, well, I'm this close, I'm going to go up there too. You know? So I went up, and the other time that I was there was a lot of people there. The owners were there, Rick and Doug were there, the cousin of the guy that found the medallion, and all the camera people. And when all that's going on, you don't have quite the chance to absorb.
Yeah, you miss a lot.
So that I want to just be up there on that lot by myself and walk around and feel it, you know. Yeah. So when you watch this, let's take a look. This is where the castle once was. It's all grown over now. So it doesn't even seem like it's big enough to have a castle or state on. But what the case is that there's a lot of trees around there, but also the lot next door appears to be part and parcel of the original castle or estate, and that's where Dennis Parada has been working on that lot over there, claiming he's found a lot of tunnels and all that. So when I discovered that the cross beam of the Nolan's Cross
points,
if you went from one end to the other, it went right up. I sent it in, they didn't respond. I had another gentleman that was on the show, Brian Farrell. He was an architect. He looked into it. He said, yeah, you're right. It goes right up there. So I talked to them. I said, can you just have Steve Guptill check it out? So he talked to the people that own the lot, and he said, pick a spot where you're pretty sure the foundation was.
For New Ross.
And I'll go back and I'll take a bead from one arm to the other arm, and boom, it went right up there too. And then I heard through the grapevine that they had that Aaron Houghton also double check it. So it's been more than verified that arm goes right up to New Ross, which tells me they're connected.
And just for our viewers that may be new to our channel, New Ross was?
We believe it was William Alexander's estate in Nova Scotia, where he intended to have a beachhead so that he could take Nova Scotia away from the French, because he couldn't you're not going to sail all the way over from England and go right into battle with somebody that's already been there for almost 20 years or 15 years, and they have their cannons trained on the waterways and whatever. You got to get there, establish a beachhead, then do what you're going to do. So in this book, I have a whole chapter. Terry Duveau, who you just saw on the show last night, if you watched it on Curse of Oak Island, he helped me with that chapter on New Ross. He made me footnoted in my original report. I had footnotes this long.
I know.
But it made the story better, because I was able to, we always talk about using primary source documents or actual documents, actual people, and by him making me footnote, I pulled those out from my research. So of course then I had to get on to the airport and go back home. And but anyway, so that's my little trek to Nova Scotia. And as you alluded to, I'm not number one. And the Templars are probably going to be number one forever. I mean, even though there's very little evidence of them being there.
But the descendants of the Templars.
The descendants of the Templars, which is who we're talking about. And so, and that's what we talked to Chris on those podcasts about. And that's, you always say we're staying in our lane. That's what our lane is. So I was, I have to thank them for including me in it, and of course thank Doc for all the help in the research. It's just been crazy the last few years. But anyway, and next month, we're going to talk about the curse.
The curse.
And we're going to use the same thing, actual documents, actual people, pragmatic background to what that curse was all about, just like we did with the H.O. Stone.
Great. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed today's show. It's a little different than what we've done in the past, but it's really a upfront, first-person view of what it's like to be on a international show that's involved with Oak Island. And Jim, congratulations being in that elite group. That's all I got to say. Yeah. And allowing me to tag along all this time. And so please, I encourage you to share the video, and I hope you enjoyed it. So we're going to sign off now, right?
And we'll see you next month.
So thanks for checking in with us. Please hit the subscribe button if you like. And also remember, we do have a Facebook page that we put things out there from time to time. So I'm Doc Hamill signing off, and
Jim McQuiston. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
This is Robert Clotworthy, and you have been listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Be sure to catch every episode.